There's a voice in your head that has been narrating your entire life, and you've never once questioned whether it's telling the truth. It speaks in first person. It uses your memories. It sounds so much like you that you've never considered the possibility that it isn't you at all. But here's what nobody tells you. That voice didn't come from you. It was installed. Tonight, you're going to understand exactly where that voice came from, how it constructed an identity you've been defending for years, and why the single most important thing you can do for your own future is to stop letting your brain's default narration define who you are. This isn't philosophy. This is architecture, and once you see the blueprint, you can't unsee it. If this is the kind of understanding that actually changes how you move through a day, not just how you think about one, then staying connected to this channel is probably already making sense to you. Most people who feel stuck, anxious, or quietly disappointed in themselves believe the same thing. They believe something is fundamentally wrong with them. They think the proof is that voice, the one that reminds them of every failure, every awkward moment, every time they didn't measure up. They assume the voice is reporting facts, that it's a reliable narrator delivering accurate news about who they really are. This is the wrong framework entirely. That voice isn't reporting, it's constructing. There's a massive difference between a mirror that reflects what's there and a projector that throws an image onto a blank wall. What most people call their inner voice is not a mirror. It's a projector running old film, and it's been running so long that you've mistaken the projection for the wall itself. The moment you understand this, everything shifts. You're not broken. You're not deficient. You've just never been told that the narrator in your head is not a journalist. It's an algorithm, and like any algorithm, it can be understood, examined, and deliberately overridden. Here's where that algorithm comes from. Imagine you're 5 years old and you knock a glass of water off the table. Someone you love, someone whose opinion is your entire world at that age, snaps at you. Maybe they say you're clumsy. Maybe they just sigh in a way that communicates disappointment so clearly it might as well be a sentence. Your brain at 5 doesn't have the sophistication to think that reaction was disproportionate and probably reflects their stress level, not my coordination. Your brain does something much simpler. It writes a rule. Rule. I am the kind of person who messes things up. And then it files that rule somewhere deep, somewhere below conscious access, and it starts looking for evidence to confirm it. This is what neuroscience calls the default mode network, and it's one of the most important systems in your brain that you've probably never heard of. The default mode network activates when you're not focused on an external task. It's what fires up when you're lying in bed at night, when you're in the shower, when you're driving a familiar route and your mind starts wandering. And what it does during those moments is narrate. It tells you stories about yourself. It replays the past. It simulates the future. It constructs and reinforces your sense of identity over and over and over again, thousands of times a day, mostly without you noticing. Here's the critical part. The default mode network doesn't narrate based on what's true. It narrates based on what's familiar. Your brain is not a truth-seeking machine. It's a pattern completion machine. It takes whatever rules were written earliest, whatever stories got the most emotional reinforcement, and it plays those on repeat, because repetition is what your neural architecture interprets as real. A thought you've had 10,000 times doesn't feel like a thought anymore. It feels like a fact. This is why someone can receive genuine praise from 10 people and one piece of mild criticism, and at 2 in the morning, the only thing echoing through their skull is the criticism. It's not because the criticism was more valid. It's because it matched the existing narrative. The default mode network grabbed it, recognized the pattern, and slotted it in like a puzzle piece that fit. The praise didn't match the internal story, so the brain flagged it as noise and discarded it. You didn't choose this. You didn't decide to ignore the praise. Your brain's pattern-matching system did it for you, automatically, silently, before you had any say in the matter. There's a deeper layer here that makes this even more important to understand. The stories your default mode network tells aren't just casual thoughts. They become the lens through which you perceive everything. Psychologists call this your self-schema, a mental framework that filters incoming information to match your existing self-concept. But forget the term for a second and think about what this actually means in your life. If your internal narrative says you're not the kind of person who succeeds in relationships, then every interaction gets filtered through that story. A partner being quiet on a Tuesday evening isn't just a person being tired. It becomes evidence. Your brain turns neutral data into confirmation because that's what schemas do. They don't observe reality. They sculpt it. 2,000 years before any neuroscientist mapped the default mode network, Epictetus said something that cuts to the exact same truth. It's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things. He wasn't guessing. He was pointing at the same mechanism from a different angle. The event is neutral. The narration is everything, and the narration isn't yours. It's inherited. It was built from the reactions of people who raised you, the social environments that shaped you, the moments of pain that your young brain didn't have the tools to process accurately. You've been living inside someone else's story about you and defending it as if you wrote it. Now here's where this gets personal. There are 2 traps most people fall into once they start recognizing this voice, and both of them feel like progress while actually keeping you exactly where you are. The first trap is going to war with the voice. You hear it say something negative, and you try to argue with it. You try to shout it down with affirmations. You try to force positive thoughts on top of negative ones, like painting over rust. This doesn't work, and there's a specific reason why. Your brain has a system called the ironic process theory, which means that actively trying to suppress a thought makes that thought more active, not less. Tell yourself not to think about a white bear, and your brain will show you nothing but white bears for the next 5 minutes. Fighting the voice gives it more airtime. It makes the narrative louder. You feel like you're doing the work, but you're actually feeding the thing you're trying to starve. The second trap is subtler, and it's the one that catches the smartest people. It's believing the voice but trying to outperform it. You hear the story that says you're not enough, and instead of questioning the story, you accept it as true and try to compensate. You overwork. You overachieve. You build an entire external life designed to disprove an internal narrative you never stopped believing. And the cruelest part is that it never works. No amount of external success can override an internal story because the schema filters out the evidence. You hit the goal and immediately move the goalpost. You receive the recognition and immediately explain it away. The voice wins every time because you never challenged whether it was accurate. You just tried to outrun it. The path between these 2 traps is narrower than you'd think. but it's the only one that actually leads somewhere. You don't fight the voice. You don't obey the voice. You watch it. That's the entire shift. You learn to observe the narration without becoming the narration. And this isn't some abstract meditation concept. This is a specific neurological skill that physically changes the structure of your brain when you practice it. Here's what happens inside your skull when you do this. When you're fused with the voice, when you hear "I'm not good enough" and you experience it as a direct perception of reality, your prefrontal cortex is essentially offline. The default mode network is running the show, and there's no executive oversight. But the moment you notice the thought as a thought, the moment you shift from "I'm not good enough" to "I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough," your prefrontal cortex activates. You've just moved from being inside the movie to sitting in the theater watching the screen. Same movie, completely different experience. This is not a metaphor for something subtle. This is a measurable, observable change in brain activation patterns. Studies on what researchers call cognitive diffusion show that this single shift, noticing a thought rather than being consumed by it, reduces the emotional impact of that thought by a significant margin. Not because you've changed the thought, because you've changed your position relative to the thought. And that changes everything. So here's what you do. Tonight, not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. You're going to wait for the voice. You won't have to wait long. It'll come when you're brushing your teeth, or lying in bed, or scrolling through something that triggers a comparison. The narrative will start. You'll hear it begin to tell you something about who you are, what you can't do, what you'll never be. And in that moment you do one thing. You name it. Out loud if you can, silently if you have to. You say, "That's the narrator." Not, "That's wrong." Not, "I need to think positive." Just, "That's the narrator." That's it. 3 words. That's the narrator. What you're doing with those 3 words is activating your prefrontal cortex and deactivating the default mode network's grip on your identity. You're creating a gap between stimulus and response. You're stepping out of the movie. And every single time you do it, you're strengthening a neural pathway that makes the next time easier. You're not fighting the voice. You're not running from the voice. You're simply refusing to let it sit in the driver's seat, unchallenged. Do it tonight. Do it again tomorrow morning. Do it every time you catch the narration running. You won't catch it every time. That's fine. You don't need to catch it every time. You need to catch it once more today than you did yesterday. That's the whole game. You're not building a new voice. You're not trying to become someone who never has a negative thought. That person doesn't exist and never will. What you're building is something far more powerful. You're building the capacity to hear the old story and choose not to live inside it. You're building the space between who your brain says you are and who you actually decide to be. And that space is everything. That space is where every real decision you've ever made actually lives. Not in the thought, not in the feeling. In the gap between the narration and your response to it. That's where you exist. Not in the story, in the choosing. Most people spend their entire lives arguing with a narrator they never hired, defending an identity they never chose, and trying to fix a version of themselves that was never accurate in the first place. You don't have to be most people, not because you're special, because you now understand the mechanism. You see the projector. You know it's not the wall. The voice will keep talking, It's going to talk tomorrow morning and the morning after that and on the hardest day of your life. That's what it does. That's all it does. But you are not the voice. You're the one who hears it.